Welcome back to our panel discussion, Threat Intelligence Tackling the Cyber Arms Race in Government, sponsored by KPMG here on federalnewsradio.com and Federal News Radio 1500 AM. My guests today are Pat Flanders, the Chief Information Officer at the Defense Health Agency, Mark Johnson is Chief Information Security Officer at the U.S. Agency for International Development, and Tony Hubbard is a Principal at KPMG. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. And let's talk about a little bit of something that every government agency has, and that is suppliers and vendors. And they are part of your ecosystem. You exchange not only goods and money with them, but also data. And so what are some of the issues with respect to cybersecurity of the supply chain, or just cybersecurity of those that you do business with that, that hold, in some cases, data that is governmental data? Mark, you want to?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I think this is a very important issue, and there's a lot of attention being given to it, particularly government-wide. Again, OMB and DHS are focusing on this very heavily. They're giving a lot of guidance and directives to agencies. And I think a good example of this was one that came out last fall. DHS and OMB gave a mandate through a binding operational directive to all agencies to rid their networks of Kaspersky software. Right, yep. So the interesting thing from that was that it was a clear supply chain issue. The Kaspersky software is and has been used by many agencies for many years, and additionally, as the order came out and agencies began implementing it, there was supplemental guidance needed to be given, because there were other softwares that that agencies are using that had as subcomponents Kaspersky software. So it was like peeling back the layers of an onion. So supply chain is very embedded in everything we do, and the emphasis on it is quite important. I think that contract clauses are a must, and that's something which is going to be, I think, more and more prevalent as we move into the future. Specific contract clauses that both the procurement departments and the IT departments and the suppliers themselves become more aware of. That, as you mentioned, the whole ecosystem knows that, hey, these are the rules of the game, and this is what we have to be aware of as part of our process of doing business.
Yeah, and Pat, in addition to the regular suppliers of electronics and so forth and computers, you've got medical devices. And what are some of the trends in ensuring medical device security?
Right, so two things. Medical device security is a function of both the network and the actual hygiene of the device. Mm-hmm. And so, again, taking over the service medical networks, because we don't have AI yet that can do this for us, we've come up with, I think, is a pretty unique isolation architecture, right? That consists of 12 zones. It's just VLANs, but we're now standardizing them across the network and all the medical facilities, so that vendors can build to the configuration of the VLAN and inherit controls and speed up that ATO process. So that's one thing. Then the separate thing is our other problem is there's so much variance in the number of devices we have, and so we're standing up a material management center for devices this coming year that will put together a catalog, and we'll try to beat out some of the variance of this, right?
Sure. Do you work with VA or TRICARE in any of these systems?
So TRICARE, extensively with TRICARE, and then back to the contract discussion, right? So there's the DoD has different rules for if you're operating a system on behalf of the DoD, or if you're using our data in your system, right? So it's DoD 800-173 versus 8510.01. And so, and that specifies very specific things that you need to do, and the extent to which our information security managers review your commercial, in some cases the actual structure, in some cases your security plan. So we're in pretty deep in all those things. And every year we add more things to that. So and commercial industry's coming along with us. So.
Yeah. Okay. What does it look like government-wide? Again, we'll go to you, Tony, on the whole.
Yeah, just to build on what Pat said, certainly the 800, 171 requirements and other special publication requirements from this, I think, was obviously a good step, and those requirements are now building on 853 in terms of just having a good, solid set of security controls in place. And I know DoD is in the process of doing more regular assessments around the 800, 171 compliance from its contractor community. So I think that's all very positive and just provides another just more rigor and governance around the whole process. So very productive in my mind.
And earlier we spoke about receiving threat intelligence from various sources. What if you are the originator of threat intelligence? That might happen in an agency, like that contractor showed you WannaCry. How do you broadcast that to the government? Because this whole sharing mechanism has gotten to be a pretty complicated apparatus over the past 10 years or so.
With
How do
regard
you
to
pick up the phone and call?
Sure, yeah. With regard to USAID, we feel very fortunate. We have a very strong relationship with Department of Homeland Security. They provide a lot of really good services. You know, we talked about CDM, and then I think there's Einstein. There's a lot of U.S. CERT. Great organization, and also OMB. We work very closely with them. So we would, if we would be in that situation, we would report to the appropriate channels at DHS, and they would then make sure that it got to the other agencies.
Have you ever discovered anything?
No comment.
All right, we'll see it on the sharing network. Pat?
Yeah, absolutely. We've discovered things, and so there's a very formal reporting process in the DoD for how we do this. And, I mean, immediately our Cyber Operations Center notifies the entire military health network, and our commercial partners who do business with us. But then that goes to JFQ Doden, and then from DoD into the CERT and DHS.
All right, let me ask this. Let's take a look in the future. What would you like your whole cybersecurity apparatus to look like, especially, again, concentrating on knowledge through threat intelligence? What would you like to see a year from now or 2 years from now that is maybe missing from the whole picture at this point? Here's your chance.
AI as the enabler for less people doing RMF manually. That's it.
And if you had the same payroll, let's say, enabled by artificial intelligence, what could those people do alternatively?
Well, so I would see this as an efficiency so that we could use it to do, other things with the money, other innovative things.
Like surgery.
Surgery and telehealth and some of the things that we, cutting edge things. There's lots of research in the medical, in the medical area.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree with Pat. I think the discussion that we've had here today, a lot of the discussion's been around automation, artificial intelligence, use of innovative technologies. We would also, as Pat's organization, I'm so sure Tony would say the same thing. He'd like to see that throughout the federal government, see a higher degree of automation, and free up the human effort to do higher value-added tasks, analysis of data. A lot of the things, a lot of folks that work in the cyber field in the government have great certifications, just phenomenal backgrounds. And I think this will give us a chance for people to use more of the higher level value add skills they have, rather than sort of what I would call sort of like the manual work.
Yeah, I imagine that when it comes to cybersecurity, the workforce is in some ways analogous to the programming workforce, where if all they do is program, they can become obsolete. And new languages come on, new technologies, new methodologies come into this from time to time, and you don't want to be stuck with a workforce that's not up to date. So is that part of the puzzle here?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, and I think that will also, for all three of our organizations, solve an issue of the huge cyber workforce shortage. I think if we can bring greater automation, leverage new technologies, I think that we will be able to do more with less, and it totally solve the issue. It'll help ameliorate the issue where we right now we're facing a huge shortage of, in terms of the number of people that do cybersecurity work is X, and the available amount of people by all estimates is some fraction of that X.
Sure. Tony, what's your view of where agencies ought to be strategizing?
Well, I think all those points are excellent, and I agree 100%. So I think there's no question the automation piece is critical. And I think I'll go back to one of the initial points we talked about, is tying it back to the people, and the example I gave where a federal CISO was frustrated with the level of threat information / intelligence he was getting. And I think so as we continue to get more folks hopefully recruiting into the cybersecurity industry, and hopefully recognizing that you don't necessarily need to have a technology degree to be successful in cybersecurity, especially if you're in the threat intelligence analysis world. It's more about, obviously you need to have some understanding, but it's more of a natural curiosity and trying to diagnose what a potential situation might be. But the most important element, to the example I gave with the federal CISO, is communication, because what happens is you can't just get in a room of executives like Pat and Mark and talk about bits and bytes and this vulnerability and that vulnerability. You need to really be able to communicate what that means to the organization and what is the real risk to the organization. And I think that's something that, as we all kind of work in this industry, just collectively doing a better job of just elevating the conversation up to more a risk-based conversation versus just a technical bit and byte conversation, I think is critical.
And what about your top leadership in your agencies? Are you getting the support you need from them, and what can they do to enable this whole process? Because sometimes to them it looks like just something in the tech shop, and maybe they don't always realize the systemic risk that we talked about earlier that these cyber threats really pose.
No, I think probably for the last 3 years, there's been a big change in the amount of emphasis from the top. The Deputy Secretary started a monthly cyber scorecard. It's metrics that he looks at. I mean, just recently, I think he now has passed that on to the DoD CIO, but he personally did it. For our electronic health record implementation, the DoD CIO personally took over as the AO. It used to be my office, and so the DoD CIO took that over just because it was that important. We meet with the DoD CIO every other week in person with the other Fourth Estate CIOs and the commander of DISA. There's a lot of eyes on cyber in the DoD.
Yeah, I would agree with that. We're getting excellent attention from our top leadership on cybersecurity, on the related discipline, privacy, and that's very gratifying. And I think Tony made a great point. I think throughout government, I would imagine throughout the private sector too. I think there's a huge opportunity for us as people who work in the field to make sure that we couch our the information we communicate in more business terms and in strictly technological terms, because these, at the end of the day, these risk management issues are business issues that will affect the business of the agency or of the organization as a whole. And yes, we get excellent attention from our top leadership at USAID.
And recently the Trump administration came out with an executive order and trying to elevate the CIO role. We have a CISO and a CIO here. And of course this goes back to 1996. I remember the announcement of the passage of Clinger-Cohen. I was there. And so here we are still trying to get CIOs into the right saddle, and by extension CISOs. Do you feel that you have the empowerment to really drive the cybersecurity and threat intelligence reaction properly in your agencies?
Yes, and so October 1st of this year, in accordance with the 2017 NDAA, the Defense Health Agency takes over management of the treatment facilities and budget authority, and I review
and
all of
infrastructure.
all of their infrastructure. Right. There's actually there's a little time phase for the actual networks to be moved, but I will have eyes on all of the budget, and in FY20. I will have control of the entire IT budget for the medical health system. And so, yes, so the right things are happening.
Yeah. And at USAID?
Definitely. We're supportive of the executive order. We're supportive of any legislation that helps us implement the appropriate risk management strategy from the highest levels of the organization on down. So yes, we definitely think the executive order is good. We support it, and we think it's very helpful at USAID, and we're certain throughout the federal government it'll give cybersecurity more how can I say, elevated importance in terms of risk management throughout agencies.
Okay, on that note, we come to a conclusion. We're out of time. I want to thank today's guests, Pat Flanders, the Chief Information Officer at the Defense Health Agency, Mark Johnson as Chief Information Security Officer at the U.S. Agency for International Development, and Tony Hubbard as a Principal at KPMG. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. You've been listening to Federal News Radio 1500 AM. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsradio.com. Use the search term KPMG.
On behalf of KPMG, thank you for joining us. The archive session will be available shortly. If you requested a training certificate, you will also receive an email with download instructions after the webinar. This concludes our discussion. Thank you very much.